The Apostle Peter identifies himself as the writer of his two inspired letters, 1st and 2nd Peter. Peter wrote his first letter from Babylon about 62 to 64 CE. Peter used Silvanus, also known as Silas, as his secretary. Silvanus was likely the Silas who was earlier associated with the Apostle Paul. Peter addressed his first letter to anointed Christians in Pontus, Galatia, Cappadocia, Asia, and Bithynia. Christians in those lands were experiencing many trials. 1 Peter has 5 chapters. In chapter 1, Peter reminds his anointed brothers of their new birth to a living hope based on the resurrection of Jesus Christ. By remaining faithful, they will gain the reward of the unfading inheritance reserved for them in heaven. So they need to brace up their minds for spiritual activity and guard against fleshly desires. In chapter 2, the apostle calls Jesus' anointed followers a holy nation and a royal priesthood that shares things with others. In chapter 3, we read that wives should be in loving subjection to their husbands, just as Sarah was to Abraham. Husbands, in turn, should show honor to their wives. Did you know? In his first letter, Peter quotes from at least 6 Bible books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Psalms, Proverbs, and Isaiah. By quoting God's Word, Peter imitated Jesus and set a fine example for us. In chapter 4, the apostle emphasizes the need to live for God's will in imitation of Christ, even if this means suffering fiery trials. He also says that we should be vigilant with a view to prayers. In chapter 5, Peter appeals to his fellow elders to be selfless and humble shepherds of God's flock. He then encourages all to throw all their anxieties on God because He cares for them. As you read 1 Peter, note how we should brace up our minds for activity, how husbands and wives should treat each other, and how we should be willing to endure trials as we wait for God's kingdom to come.